The morning sun of Zirion Prime cast long shadows across the Galactic Naval Academy's marble courtyards. Students from 12 different worlds walked between the towering buildings, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes. Some had scales that glittered in the light. Others had multiple arms or eyes that could see colors humans never dreamed of. But today, like most days, they were all talking about the same thing. Humans. Zixthara moved through the crowd with her usual confidence. Her crystalline skin caught the sunlight and threw it back in sharp beams. Other students stepped aside as she passed, knowing she was one of the smartest tactical minds in their year. Behind her walked Creemore, a Vorthan whose enhanced brain could process battle data faster than most computers. "Did you hear what Morrison tried to teach us yesterday?" Zixthara said, her voice carrying the musical tone of her people. "He actually suggested that human cavalry charges were effective military tactics. Cavalry charges, in the age of energy weapons." Creemore's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, which was how his kind showed amusement. "The humans still think running at the enemy with sharp sticks is warfare. No wonder the Galactic Council had to ban them from real military operations." They entered the main lecture hall where dozens of students were already gathered. The room buzzed with conversation in 20 different languages, but most of it centered on the same topic: the Human Restriction Protocol. Every student in the academy knew the basic facts. Humans had joined the galactic community 50 years ago after their first contact wars. They had been eager to help with military operations across the galaxy. But something had gone wrong during those early conflicts. The details were classified, but the result was clear. The Galactic Council had passed the Human Restriction Protocol, limiting humans to small advisory roles and reconnaissance missions only. "It was for the best," said Veltar, a student whose people had evolved from deep-sea creatures. Her wet skin glistened under the classroom lights. "Humans are too primitive for modern warfare. They still think in terms of individual combat instead of coordinated fleet actions." "Exactly," Zixthara agreed. "They lack the mental capacity for proper strategic thinking. Their brains are too focused on emotion and instinct." The conversation stopped when Lieutenant Jake Morrison entered the room. He was tall for a human with short brown hair and calm gray eyes. His uniform was perfectly pressed, and he carried himself with quiet dignity, despite the barely concealed mockery of his students. Morrison set his teaching materials on the desk and looked out at the class. He could see the smirks and hear the EI whispered comments. After 3 years of teaching at the academy, he was used to it. "Good morning," Morrison said simply. "Today we will continue our study of human military history by examining the siege tactics used during the Battle of Earth." A ripple of laughter went through the classroom. Zixthara raised her hand without waiting to be called on. "Lieutenant Morrison, with respect, why do we need to study these primitive tactics? The Human Restriction Protocol exists because your species proved unable to adapt to modern warfare. Surely our time would be better spent studying successful military doctrines for more advanced civilizations." Morrison paused for a moment, his expression unchanging. "The Academy curriculum requires all students to understand the military history of member species. That includes humanity. But the restriction exists for a reason," Creemore added. "Humans showed during first contact that they cannot be trusted with large-scale military operations. Your own Galactic Council agreed that humans are too unpredictable and dangerous to themselves to participate in real warfare." More murmurs of agreement came from around the room. Morrison had heard these arguments hundreds of times. He pulled up a holographic display showing ancient Earth battles. "Let us examine the tactical decisions made during the siege," Morrison said, ignoring the continued whispers. "Note how human commanders adapted their strategies based on resource limitations and terrain advantages." "Adapted?" Zixthara laughed, her crystalline features reflecting the hologram's light. "You mean they threw bodies at the problem until something worked? There is no elegance, no precision, no mathematical beauty in human tactics. It is all brute force and acceptable casualties." The rest of the class joined in the laughter. Morrison continued his lesson, but fewer and fewer students paid attention. Instead, they whispered among themselves about human failures and primitive thinking. In the back of the classroom, Dr. Helen Carter watched the scene with growing discomfort. She was the Academy's human liaison, responsible for ensuring human students and staff were properly integrated into galactic society. But integration was proving difficult when the other species saw humans as intellectual inferiors. Carter had been at the Academy for 5 years, and the situation was getting worse, not better. The alien students' attitude toward humans had hardened from simple dismissal to active contempt. They saw the human restriction protocol as proof that humans were unfit for modern civilization. What troubled Carter most was that she knew the truth behind the restriction. She had access to classified files that these students would never see, files that contained footage and reports from humanity's early military operations in galactic space, files that would change everything these arrogant young minds believed about human warfare, but those files were sealed for good reason. The Galactic Council had decided that some truths were too dangerous to share. As Morrison's class ended, the students filed out, still laughing and making jokes about human military incompetence. Zixathera was already planning her next research paper, tentatively titled, Why Humans Should Remain Restricted, a Study in Inferior Combat Psychology. Carter approached Morrison as the last students left. "Another good day at the office?" she asked with bitter humor. Morrison packed his materials slowly. "They will learn eventually." "Will they? Or will they just graduate thinking humans are barely evolved barbarians who got lucky enough to build spaceships?" Morrison looked at her with those calm gray eyes. "Doctor, you and I both know why the restriction really exists. The question is whether these students are ready for that knowledge." Carter thought about the classified files in her office, footage from Kepler 442, New Geneva, and a dozen other worlds where human military units had operated before the restriction. Footage that would explain why the Galactic Council really feared human involvement in large-scale warfare. "Maybe it is time they learned," she said quietly. Morrison nodded. "Maybe it is." Outside, Zixathera was already gathering support for her petition to remove human military history from the Academy curriculum entirely. She believed she was fighting against primitive thinking and inferior tactical doctrine. She had no idea she was about to learn the most terrifying lesson of her young life. 3 days later, Zixathera stood before Dean Quardell's massive desk, holding a datapad filled with signatures. The Dean was an impressive sight even by galactic standards. His 6 arms moved independently as he reviewed documents, signed papers, and operated multiple computer terminals at once. His pale blue skin had the texture of ancient marble, and his large black eyes missed nothing. "Dean Quardell," Zixathera began, her voice filled with confident authority, "I present to you a petition signed by over 200 students from 11 different species. We request the immediate removal of human military history from our curriculum." The Dean stopped his multitasking and focused all his attention on the young Zilonian. "This is a serious request, Miss Zixathera. What grounds do you offer for such a change?" Creemore stepped forward, his enhanced brain already organizing the arguments they had prepared. "Sir, we believe that studying primitive human warfare is beneath our intellectual capacity. The time spent on human tactics could be better used, learning advanced strategic concepts from more developed civilizations. The human restriction protocol proves that humans are unfit for modern military operations," added Veltar from behind them. "Why should we study the methods of a species that the Galactic Council has declared too dangerous to trust with real warfare?" Dean Quardell leaned back in his chair, his 6 arms folding in a gesture that showed deep thought. "You believe human military doctrine has no educational value?" "None whatsoever," Zixathera said firmly. "Human tactics are based on primitive instincts and emotional responses. They lack the mathematical precision and logical structure that define proper military science. Studying them actually makes us worse strategists because it teaches us to think like barbarians." The Dean was quiet for a long moment. As head of the most prestigious military academy in the galaxy, he had seen many young minds filled with arrogance. But he also valued knowledge above all else, even uncomfortable knowledge. "I will consider your petition," he said finally. "But first, I want you to attend a special presentation this afternoon. A human military observer is visiting our academy, and he has offered to share some historical footage with interested students. Zixthera's crystalline features lit up with excitement. Perfect. This will give us a chance to demonstrate to the other students just how inadequate human military thinking really is. When they see actual footage of human combat failures, support for our petition will grow even stronger. Excellent, Creemore agreed. Direct evidence of human incompetence will be much more convincing than theoretical arguments. Dean Quardell made a note on his datapad. Very well. I will arrange for the presentation to take place in the main auditorium at 1400 hours. Dr. Carter will assist with the technical setup. As the students left his office, buzzing with anticipation, Dean Quardell touched a communication device on his desk. Dr. Carter, please come to my office immediately and ask Commander Turner to join us. 20 minutes later, Dr. Helen Carter sat across from the dean while Commander Alex Turner stood by the window. Turner was older than Morrison, with gray hair and scars on his hands that spoke of active military service. His uniform bore decorations that most academy students would not recognize, but Carter knew they represented conflicts in distant star systems. The students have requested to see footage of human military operations, Dean Quardell explained. They believe it will support their petition to remove human studies from our curriculum. Turner turned from the window, his expression unreadable. They want to see footage. Yes, Carter said nervously. They are expecting to witness human failure and incompetence. They think it will prove their point about the restriction protocol. Turner was quiet for a moment, then reached into his uniform and pulled out a small data core. The device was black metal with red warning labels in multiple languages. Commander, Carter said, recognizing the classification markings. Are you certain about this? Doctor, these students represent the next generation of galactic military leadership. They will graduate believing humans are primitive barbarians who got lucky enough to build spaceships. That attitude could be dangerous in the wrong circumstances, Dean. Quardell studied the data core with interest. What does this contain? Combat footage from the Kepler 442 incident, Turner replied. Full documentation of human military operations before the restriction protocol was implemented. Carter felt her stomach tighten. She had read the reports from Kepler 442, but she had never seen the actual footage. The written accounts alone had given her nightmares. Commander, that footage is classified at the highest levels. The Galactic Council specifically ordered it, sealed to prevent panic among member species. Turner met her gaze steadily. The classification was to prevent panic among civilian populations. These are military academy students. If they are going to mock human warfare, they should understand what they are mocking. Dean Quardell extended one of his 6 hands. May I examine this data core? Turner handed it over. The footage is authentic and unedited. It shows exactly what happened when 200 human soldiers encountered 50,000 Vakmor swarm warriors. The dean's large black eyes widened slightly. Every species in the galaxy knew about the Vakmor. They were an insectoid race that had consumed 3 entire star systems before mysteriously disappearing 50 years ago. Most historians assumed they had simply moved to another galaxy. The humans fought the Vakmor? Dean Quardell asked. The humans destroyed the Vakmor, Turner corrected. Completely. The entire species. That is why they vanished from galactic history. Carter stared at the commander. The reports never said humans were responsible for their extinction. The report said many things that were not entirely accurate. The Galactic Council decided that some truths were too disturbing for general knowledge. Dean Quardell held the data core carefully, as if it might explode. And you want to show this to my students? I want to show it to the students who believe humans are primitives unfit for warfare. Let them see what human warfare actually looks like. Then let them decide if they still want to remove human military history from their education. The afternoon sun was beginning to set as students filled the main auditorium. Zixthera had spread word about the presentation, and nearly the entire academy had come to watch. They expected to see fumbling human tactics and primitive strategies that would confirm everything they believed about human inferiority. Dr. Carter stood at the presentation podium, her hands shaking slightly as she connected the classified data. core to the auditorium's main display system. Commander Turner sat in the front row, his expression calm but alert. "Before we begin," Carter announced to the packed auditorium, "I must warn you that this footage contains disturbing content. It shows actual combat operations and may challenge some of your preconceptions about human military capabilities." Laughter rippled through the audience. Zixthera called out, "Doctor, we are future military officers. I think we can handle watching humans make tactical mistakes." More laughter filled the room. Carter looked at Commander Turner, who nodded grimly. "Very well," Carter said, activating the display. "This footage is from the Kepler 442 incident, recorded 50 years ago during humanity's early participation in galactic military operations. The lights dimmed and the massive screen filled with an image of a human military base under an alien sky. The timestamp in the corner showed it was taken exactly 50 years, 3 months, and 4 days ago. The situation was a routine evacuation mission," Carter continued. "A civilian colony was threatened by an approaching Vakmor swarm. A human unit was assigned to assist with the evacuation and provide rearguard protection." The students settled back in their seats, ready to critique human evacuation procedures and point out tactical errors. They had no idea they were about to witness the most terrifying military operation in galactic history. On the screen, Captain Lisa Brooks was giving orders to her soldiers, preparing for what appeared to be a standard withdrawal. The alien students began taking notes, ready to document every human mistake they observed. They had no idea that in the next hour, everything they believed about warfare was about to change forever. The footage began with what looked like a normal military base on a peaceful planet. Human soldiers moved around the compound, checking equipment and loading supply trucks. Their movements seemed slow and unorganized compared to the precise formations that alien military academies taught. "Look at their formation structure," Creemore whispered to the students around him. "No mathematical precision at all. They are scattered like leaves in the wind." Captain Lisa Brooks appeared on screen, a woman in her 30s with short blonde hair and tired eyes. She was speaking to her second-in-command, Sergeant Danny Rodriguez, a stocky man with dark hair and numerous scars on his arms. "The evacuation is proceeding on schedule," Brooks was saying. "Civilian transport ships are loading families from the outer settlements. We have maybe 6 hours before the Vakmor scouts reach the perimeter." The alien students leaned forward with interest. Everyone in the galaxy had heard stories about the Vakmor. They were insectoid creatures the size of large vehicles, with razor-sharp claws and armor that could stop most energy weapons. Worse, they moved in massive swarms that overwhelmed enemies through sheer numbers. 6 hours should be plenty of time for a proper withdrawal, Veltar commented. "Even humans should be able to organize a retreat in 6 hours." On screen, the human soldiers continued their preparations, but something was wrong with their behavior. Instead of packing equipment for evacuation, they were unpacking more weapons. Instead of preparing defensive positions for a fighting retreat, they were setting up what looked like permanent fortifications. Zixthera frowned at the display. "What are they doing? Those are not evacuation preparations." Dr. Carter paused the footage and turned to address the auditorium. "I should explain the tactical situation. The Vakmor swarm approaching this colony numbered approximately 50,000 individual warriors. The human force assigned to assist with evacuation numbered exactly 200 soldiers." A ripple of confusion went through the student audience. Those numbers made no sense for any known military doctrine. 50,000 against 200? Asked a student from the middle rows. What kind of evacuation strategy requires such odds? "That is what we are about to see," Dr. Carter replied, restarting the footage. The screen showed Captain Brooks receiving a communication from Orbital Command. Her expression grew serious as she listened to the message. When the communication ended, she gathered her soldiers around her. "Change of plans," Brooks announced to her troops. "Orbital surveillance shows the Vakmor main force is moving faster than expected. The civilian transports will not finish evacuation in time." Sergeant Rodriguez checked his tactical display. "How long do we have?" 2 hours, maybe less, the Yao. Alien students watched as the human soldiers absorbed this information, By all military logic, this was the moment when any rational commander would order immediate withdrawal. 200 soldiers could not possibly hold off 50,000 enemies for 2 hours. The only sensible decision was to retreat and save as many lives as possible. Captain Brooks looked at her soldiers for a long moment. Then she said something that made every alien student in the auditorium freeze. "We are not withdrawing." The camera captured the faces of the human soldiers as they heard this order. None of them looked surprised. None of them protested. A few actually smiled. "Sir," Rodriguez said, 50,000 Vakmor against our unit. Those are impossible odds." "Yes, they are," Brooks agreed. "Which means the Vakmor will not expect us to engage them directly. They will expect us to run. But we are not running. No, Sergeant. We are going to kill them all." Complete silence filled the academy auditorium. The alien students stared at the screen in disbelief. Creemore's enhanced brain tried to process what he had just heard, but the logic made no sense. "She cannot be serious," Zixthera whispered. "No rational commander would make such a decision." On screen, the human soldiers began preparations that defied everything the students had learned about military science. Instead of establishing defensive positions to delay the enemy, they were setting up what appeared to be offensive positions, designed to channel the Vakmor into specific areas. "They are creating kill zones," observed a student whose people specialized in defensive warfare. "But kill zones only work when you have superior firepower. 200 soldiers cannot generate enough firepower to stop 50,000 enemies." Dr. Carter paused the footage again. "At this point, I must remind you that everything you are about to see is authentic combat footage. No computer simulations, no training exercises. What you will witness actually happened." She looked out at the sea of alien faces, all showing various expressions of confusion and disbelief. The Vakmor had already destroyed 3 star systems before this encounter. Their military tactics had proven effective against every species they had encountered. They had never been defeated in open combat. Commander Turner stood up from his seat in the front row. The Vakmor were not just another enemy species. They were an extinction-level threat to galactic civilization. If they had not been stopped, at Kepler 442, they would have continued consuming worlds until nothing was left. "And you are telling us that 200 humans stopped them?" Zixthera called out, her voice filled with skepticism. "I am telling you to watch the footage and draw your own conclusions," Turner replied. The recording resumed. The first Vakmor. Scouts appeared on the horizon, massive insectoid shapes moving with frightening speed across the landscape. They were even larger than the alien students had imagined, each one the size of a small building with claws that could tear through metal. The human soldiers took their positions. Captain Brooks stood in the center of the formation, completely calm despite the approaching nightmare. "Contact in 30 seconds, Rodriguez reported. "Remember," Brooks called to her soldiers, "they are used to prey that runs. They have never fought prey that hunts back." The Vakmor scouts reached the human perimeter and attacked immediately, expecting the same easy victory they had achieved on dozens of other worlds. But instead of panicked retreat, they met concentrated fire from weapons that seemed specifically designed to penetrate their armor. The first wave of scouts fell within minutes. How did they know what weapons to use? Asked a student whose people prided themselves on military intelligence. The Vakmor had never been successfully engaged before. How could the humans know their weaknesses? On screen, more Vakmor were arriving. Hundreds, then thousands. The sound of their approach was like thunder, a rumbling that shook the camera. Any normal military force would have been overwhelmed by the sheer psychological impact of facing such numbers, but the human soldiers seemed to become calmer as the odds grew worse. 10,000 contacts and climbing, Rodriguez reported, his voice steady despite the approaching disaster. "Good," Captain Brooks replied. "The more that come, the more we can kill in one place." Zixthera stood up in her seat, her crystalline features reflecting her confusion and growing fear. "This is impossible. No species thinks like this. No rational mind sees worse odds as an advantage." Dr. Carter stopped the footage one more time. "Miss Zixthera, you have spent considerable time studying human psychology for your research paper. In your expert opinion, what mental condition would cause A military commander to see impossible odds as a tactical advantage? The young Zolonian thought carefully, her analytical mind trying to find a logical explanation for what she was witnessing. Madness, she said finally. Only madness would cause such thinking. Yes, Dr. Carter agreed quietly. That is exactly what the Galactic Council concluded. The question you must now ask yourself is this: what happens when madness is applied systematically to military operations? She restarted the footage. On screen, the main Vakmor force was beginning to arrive. 50,000 insectoid killers that had never known defeat, approaching 200 humans who seemed genuinely excited about the impossible fight ahead of them. The alien students watched in growing horror as they began to understand that they were about to witness something far beyond their comprehension. This was not primitive human tactics. This was something else entirely. Something that would haunt their dreams for years to come. The main Vakmor force hit the human positions like a black wave of death. 50,000 insectoid warriors charged across the landscape, their claws gleaming in the alien sunlight. Each creature stood 3 meters tall with armor that had stopped, the weapons of 3 different civilizations. The alien students expected to see the humans break and run. Instead, they watched something that violated every principle of military science they had ever learned. The humans opened fire with weapons that seemed designed specifically to kill Vakmor. But that was not the disturbing part. The disturbing part was how they used themselves as bait. Squad 7, advance to position Alpha, Captain Brooks ordered over the radio. Let them see you. On screen, 12 human soldiers ran forward into an exposed position where thousands of Vakmor could see them clearly. The insectoid warriors immediately changed direction to attack this small, apparently vulnerable group. They are going to be slaughtered, Veltar whispered, her wet skin growing pale as she watched. But Squad 7 did not retreat when the Vakmor charged toward them. Instead, they held their position until the last possible second. Then Sergeant Rodriguez's voice came over the radio. Now. The ground around Squad 7 exploded. Hidden charges that had been planted earlier detonated in perfect sequence, creating a chain reaction that killed over 2,000 Vakmor in less than 10 seconds. The 12 human soldiers vanished in the explosion along with their enemies. Complete silence filled the Academy auditorium. They killed themselves, Creemore said, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly as his enhanced brain tried to process what he had witnessed. They deliberately killed themselves to eliminate the enemy. On screen, Captain Brooks watched the explosion calmly. Squad 7 eliminated. Enemy losses approximately 2,000. Acceptable exchange ratio. Acceptable? Zixthera stood up again, her crystalline features reflecting the horror she felt. 12 lives for 2,000 is acceptable, Dr. Carter? Pause the footage. For humans engaged in total warfare, yes, that is considered an excellent exchange ratio. The students looked at each other in growing fear. This was not military tactics as they understood them. This was something far more terrifying. The footage continued. The remaining human soldiers regrouped and prepared for the next phase of their impossible battle. But instead of being demoralized by the loss of Squad 7, they seemed more focused and determined. Rodriguez, take Squad 3 and draw their attention to the eastern approach, Brooks ordered. How many do you want us to take with us, Captain? All of them. Rodriguez nodded, as if this was a perfectly normal request. He gathered 15 soldiers and moved toward a position that would put them directly in the path of the remaining Vakmor swarm. This is insane. A student from the back of the auditorium called out. They are sending 15 soldiers against tens of thousands of enemies. But the humans had not finished preparing their nightmare tactics. As Squad 3 moved into position, the remaining soldiers were setting up something that made the alien students feel sick to their stomachs. Medical stations? Zixthera read the human text appearing on screen. Why are they setting up medical stations in the middle of a battle? Commander Turner stood up to address the confused students. Because wounded humans make excellent bait. The Vakmor are attracted to the sounds of injured prey. The students stared at him in horror as they began to understand what they were seeing. On screen, Squad 3 engaged the main Vakmor force in what appeared to be a hopeless battle. The 15 humans were quickly overwhelmed, but they did not die quickly. Instead, they fought with a brutal efficiency that kept them alive just long enough to serve their purpose. The sounds of human soldiers screaming in pain drew thousands of Vakmor toward the medical stations. The insectoid warriors expected to find easy victims. Instead, they found the most terrifying trap any species had ever devised. Medical stations were not medical stations at all. They were weapons platforms disguised as places of healing. When the Vakmor swarmed toward the sounds of wounded humans, they ran directly into concentrated firepower that cut through their ranks like invisible blades. But the humans were not finished. The wounded soldiers, some barely alive, continued to serve as bait even as they lay dying. Their pain drew more and more Vakmor into the kill zones, where hidden weapons eliminated them by the thousands. "They are using their own wounded as weapons," Cremor said, his voice barely a whisper. "They are weaponizing their own suffering." The footage showed Captain Brooks moving through the battlefield, coordinating the slaughter with calm precision. She stepped over the bodies of her own soldiers without emotion, focused entirely on maximizing enemy casualties. Squad 5, position yourselves in Sector 7. Make sure you are visible when you get wounded. Understood, Captain. How long do you want us to stay alive after contact? Long enough to draw at least 5,000 targets into range. The alien students watched in sick fascination as Squad 5 deliberately exposed themselves to Vakmor claws, taking wounds that would normally require immediate medical attention. But instead of seeking help, they used their injuries to lure more enemies into carefully prepared ambush zones. "Captain," Rodriguez's voice came over the radio, weak with pain but still determined. "I count 15,000 more contacts approaching. From the north." "Good," Brooks replied, reloading her weapon with mechanical precision. "Channel them toward the civilians." "Toward the civilians?" Zixthara screamed, finally reaching her breaking point. "They are using civilian evacuation sites. As bait?" Dr. Carter paused the footage again. "The evacuation sites are empty. The civilians were moved to secure positions hours ago. But the Vakmor do not know this." On screen, thousands of Vakmor warriors rushed toward what they thought were helpless civilian targets. Instead, they found Captain Brooks and her remaining soldiers waiting in positions that offered no retreat and no escape. "Final phase," Brooks announced to her troops. "Remember, we do not need to survive this. We only need to complete the mission." What happened next broke every rule of warfare that the alien students had ever learned. The humans did not fight to win ground or to survive the battle. They fought to inflict maximum casualties with no regard for their own lives. Captain Brooks personally led a charge into the center of the Vakmor swarm. She was not trying to break through enemy lines or capture a strategic position. She was trying to get close enough to the Vakmor Queen to deliver a weapon that would destroy the entire command structure. The students watched in horrified silence as Brooks fought her way through hundreds of enemies, taking wounds that should have killed her, but somehow staying alive through pure determination. Vakmor claws tore through her armor and opened deep cuts across her body, but she kept moving forward. "She is going to die," Beltar whispered. "She has to know she is going to die." "Of course she knows," Commander Turner said quietly. "That is the point. She is not trying to survive, she is trying to complete the mission." On screen, Captain Brooks reached the Vakmor Queen, a massive creature that stood twice as tall as the other warriors. Brooks was bleeding from dozens of wounds, her armor was torn and one of her arms hung useless at her side. But she was smiling. The Queen's claws pierced through Brooks' chest, lifting her off the ground. Any normal species would have died instantly from such wounds. But Brooks had one last action to complete. She activated the weapon she had carried through the entire battle, a device that released something into the Vakmor Queen's body. The Queen convulsed and screamed, then collapsed. Within seconds, every Vakmor warrior on the battlefield began to fall as well. Captain Brooks died with that smile still on her face, watching 50,000 enemies die around her. The footage ended with the aftermath. 200 human soldiers had engaged 50,000 Vakmor warriors. Final casualties: 197 humans dead, 3 critically wounded. Vachmore survivors, 0. Mission status, complete victory. The Academy auditorium was completely silent. The alien students sat frozen in their seats, trying to process what they had witnessed. Finally, Zixithara found her voice. "Why?" she asked, her crystal features reflecting her confusion and terror. "Why would anyone fight like that?" Dr. Carter looked out at the sea of horrified faces. "Because that is what humans do when we decide something must be stopped. We do not fight to survive. We fight to win, regardless of the cost." Commander Turner stepped forward. "The Galactic Council did not ban humans from warfare to protect the galaxy from our incompetence. They banned us to protect the galaxy from our competence." The terrible truth settled over the students like a heavy blanket. The human restriction protocol was not about human weakness. It was about human strength turned into something that other species could not comprehend or control, something that even other humans feared to unleash. The next morning, the Galactic Naval Academy felt like a different place. Students walked through the hallways in small, quiet groups. The usual chatter and laughter had disappeared. In the dining halls, conversations stopped whenever someone mentioned humans or the footage they had seen. Zixithara sat alone in the library, surrounded by books about human psychology and military history. Her crystalline features looked dull in the artificial light, as if the shine had gone out of them. She had not slept since watching the Kepler 442 footage. Creemore found her there 3 hours later, his own enhanced brain struggling to make sense of what they had witnessed. "I have been running calculations all night," he said, sitting down across from her. "The tactical decisions the humans made should not have worked. No computer simulation predicts success with their methods. That is because no computer can simulate insanity," Zixithara replied without looking up from her books. "I have been reading human military theory. Do you know what I found?" Creemore shook his head. "They have entire sections dedicated to acceptable casualty rates. 90% losses are considered reasonable if the mission succeeds. 90%, Creemore. They plan for almost everyone to die." Other students began gathering around their table, drawn by the discussion. Word had spread quickly through the academy about what the footage contained. Everyone wanted to understand what they had seen. "But why?" asked Veltar, her wet skin still pale from the shock. "Why would any species develop such tactics?" "Because they work," said a new voice. Lieutenant Morrison had approached their table quietly. He looked tired, as if he had not slept either. "You saw the results. 200 soldiers eliminated a threat that had consumed 3 star systems." Zixithara looked up at him with new eyes. Before yesterday, she had seen Morrison as a primitive teacher of outdated tactics. Now she saw something else entirely. "You knew," she accused. "You knew what we would see in that footage." Morrison nodded slowly. "I fought in action similar to Kepler 442 before the restriction was implemented. That is why I teach here instead of serving in active operations." "Because the Council banned human military involvement?" "No," Morrison said quietly. "Because I asked to be transferred. After seeing what humans do in total warfare, some of us requested assignment to non-combat roles." The student stared at him, a human soldier who had voluntarily removed himself from combat because he was afraid of his own species' methods. "What did you see out there?" Creemore asked. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "I saw humans solve problems that no other species could solve, and I saw the price we pay for those solutions." Dr. Carter appeared at the library entrance looking for Morrison. When she saw the gathered students, she approached carefully. "How are you all feeling after yesterday's presentation?" she asked. "Confused," Zixithara admitted. "Terrified. I do not understand how humans can think the way they do." "We do not think differently," Carter explained. "We just have different priorities. When we decide something must be stopped, we are willing to pay any price to stop it." "Any price," Veltar repeated. "Including your own lives." "Especially our own lives," Morrison added. "Individual survival becomes irrelevant when the species or mission is at stake." Dean Quardell entered the library with several other faculty members. The six-armed administrator looked troubled, his usual calm confidence shaken by the events of the previous day. "Students," he announced, "I want to discuss the petition you submitted regarding human military studies." Zixthara stood up slowly, her petition forgotten in the wake of what she had learned. "Dean, I would like to withdraw the petition." "Why?" "Because I was wrong. Completely terrifyingly wrong. Human military doctrine is not primitive. It is something else entirely. Something we need to understand." Creemore nodded agreement. "The tactical principles they demonstrated yesterday are beyond anything we study here. They have weaponized concepts that other species cannot comprehend, such as acceptable loss," Zixthara said, "tactical sacrifice, victory through self-destruction. They fight to win regardless of survival, which makes them the most dangerous military force in known space." Dean Quardell considered this carefully. "And what is your recommendation regarding the human restriction protocol?" The students looked at each other, then back at the dean. Finally, Zixthara spoke for all of them. "The restriction should be maintained, not to protect humans from us, but to protect us from humans." "You believe they are that dangerous?" "Dean," Creemore said, his enhanced brain having processed all the implications, "the footage showed us one small unit destroying an extinction-level threat. Imagine what would happen if humans decided that another species posed a similar threat." The implications hung in the air like a dark cloud. Every student understood what Creemore meant. If humans could eliminate 50,000 Vakmor with 200 soldiers, what could they do with a full military fleet? "There is something else you should consider," Dr. Carter said quietly. "The Kepler 442 incident happened 50 years ago. Human military technology and tactics have advanced significantly since then." "You mean they have gotten better at warfare?" Veltar asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Much better," Morrison confirmed. "The methods you saw yesterday are considered outdated by current human military standards." Complete silence fell over the library. The students tried to imagine warfare more advanced than what they had witnessed, and failed. "Then why do humans accept the restriction?" Zixthara asked. "If you are as powerful as the footage suggests, why do you allow the Council to limit your military involvement?" Morrison and Carter exchanged glances. Finally, Morrison answered, "Because we choose to. We understand what we are capable of, and we understand that other species fear us for good reason. We accept the restrictions because we want to be part of galactic civilization, not its destroyers." "But the choice is yours," Dean Quardell observed. "You could reject the restrictions at any time." "Yes," Carter agreed. "The restriction only works because humans enforce it on ourselves. The day we decide to stop accepting it—" She let the sentence hang unfinished, but everyone understood the implication. Over the following weeks, the academy changed completely. Lieutenant Morrison's classes became the most popular on campus. Students who had once mocked human military doctrine now studied it with fearful fascination. Research papers shifted from ridiculing human tactics to analyzing human combat psychology and the tactical applications of acceptable casualties. The library's human military history section, once ignored, became constantly occupied. But the most significant change was in how the students viewed the human restriction protocol. What had once seemed like evidence of human weakness was now understood as the most important peace treaty in galactic history. Zixthara presented her final research paper to a packed auditorium. The title had changed from her original plan, "Why the Human Restriction Protocol Must Be Maintained, a Study in Voluntary Restraint as Ultimate Power." "We have learned that humans are not restricted from galactic warfare because they are primitive or ineffective," she concluded. "They are restricted because they have weaponized concepts that other species cannot understand. Acceptable loss, tactical sacrifice, and victory through destruction of self." She paused, looking out at her fellow students. "Every species in the galaxy fights to survive. Humans fight to win, regardless of survival. This makes them more dangerous than any weapon we have ever developed. Therefore," she continued, "the human restriction protocol should be maintained, not as punishment for human incompetence but as protection for galactic civilization." The auditorium erupted in applause, but it was not the cheerful applause of academic success. It was the grim applause of beings who had looked into the abyss and understood what they had seen. After the presentation, Zixthera found Lieutenant Morrison in his office. "Lieutenant, I have one final question." "What is it?" "The footage showed humans choosing to accept terrible casualties to achieve victory. But you also choose to accept restrictions that limit your power. Why?" Morrison looked out his office window at the alien students walking across the campus, laughing and learning together in the peaceful environment of the academy. "Because some victories are not worth the price," he said quietly. "We could rule the galaxy through fear. We could eliminate any species that opposes us, but what kind of existence would that be? You choose restraint. We choose to be better than what we are capable of being. That is the most human thing of all." As Zixthera left his office, she realized she had learned the most important lesson of her education. The most dangerous beings in the galaxy were not those who could destroy everything in their path. The most dangerous beings were those who could destroy everything, but chose not to. And somewhere in the depths of space, humanity continued to patrol the borders of civilization, accepting restrictions they could break at any moment, protecting species that feared them, and carrying the burden of being the galaxy's most terrible and most necessary guardians. The restriction would hold, as long as humans chose to honor it, and everyone hoped they would never choose otherwise.